In this video, we're going to dive deep into how to build and play chords on Push 2 like a pro. So if you have a Push 2 sitting in your studio and you're still unsure about how to voice chords, create chord progressions, or just want a reminder, this video is for you. I mean, Push 2 is an instrument from the future. It's completely unique. It's not like any other MIDI controller. It's not like a guitar. It's not like a piano. Although there's overlap, it is its own instrument. So let's take a look under the hood on how to create chords with Push 2. Hey yo, it's Alex from Metamind Music, and as always with this channel, it's my mission to help musicians such as yourself produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. All right, let's dive into understanding this Push 2 to be able to play it like a pro and make up some awesome chords and really express yourself through this amazing instrument. And Push 2 is in itself its own instrument. It's unlike any other MIDI controller. It's not like the piano. It's not like a guitar. It's its own thing. Although there's a lot of overlap between the Push 2 and other instruments, it is its own instrument. So really learning how to play certain things and express yourself through it is a huge advantage if you have one. And just to be upfront, this is not an in-depth music theory class. If you're interested in learning the basics of music theory with the Push 2, let me know in the comments down below, and I'd be more than happy to make separate videos talking about music theory from the ground up using the Push 2. But for this video, I'm just going to explain what you need to know to be able to make awesome sounding chords on this instrument. So ever since I got Push 2 like 3 or 4 years ago, it's actually helped me learn a lot of music theory because it's helped me visualize it in a way that makes sense for me. Because I'm a guitarist, and the way that the guitar is laid out is that you have both an X and Y axis to access notes. And same thing with Push. You have both X and Y axes to play with, and this actually helps you learn shapes that you can then move around and apply them to various contexts, just like a guitar. So if you play guitar or play bass or are familiar with the layout of a guitar or bass tuned to fourths, you'll have an idea of how this is laid out as we move forward. But if not, don't worry, I'm going to explain everything that you need to know. All right, number one, let's talk about the layout of what we're looking at here on the Push. So right now we're in note mode. So when you hit note mode, the pads will take this appearance. All right, and once you're in note mode, you can also hit the scale button and it'll bring up a menu that allows you to pick from different scales. And depending what scale and what root note you have, so you can change the scale by moving these encoders, and you can change the key center by hitting these different buttons to change the key center. If you want to go to G, go to A flat, go back down to C, you can change that from up there. And whatever scale and key center you have picked, Push 2 will map these pads to fit that scale that you selected. So this is super fun to be able to vibe out in a scale, explore different sounds without having to worry about hitting wrong notes. So let's zoom into these pads and actually break down what we're looking at when we look at these 64 pads laid out in this manner. So the first thing you'll notice is that some pads are darker than the others. Some of them are dark purple and the rest are actually white. And what this means is that the dark purple or dark whatever color you have selected for your track represents the octave of whatever scale you've picked. So basically it represents whatever note you have picked to be your key center. So in this case, we're working with C major just to keep it easy. If you think about a piano, it's all of the white keys that make up the C major scale starting on C. And with this scale selected, that means that all of our dark purple pads will be the C note. It'll be the root of the scale. So all of these different dark colored pads are actually octaves of our root note of whatever scale you're working with. So this is a C, but just an octave higher. This is a C octave higher, so on and so forth. Also, if you want to change the octave of the pads that you're playing with, you can hit up octave to keep going higher and higher octaves. At the same time, you can hit octave down to get to lower and lower octaves of the same scale. All right, so let's actually talk about how the various notes are laid out in key mode of the Push 2. So first and foremost, we know that the dark notes are our octave. There's our octave. And we can ascend the scale that we've selected by starting from the octave and going upwards, so this way, in groups of 3. So if we start at the C and we go in groups of 3, we'll climb up the scale until we reach the octave once again. We can do this from the next octave up, starting here, and go up in groups of 3. Once again, we went through the C major scale once again. And you can do this at any point of the scale. You can start at the root, or you can start anywhere. You can start here. And you'll run through the scale starting and ending on whatever note you started from. The other way that you can actually ascend a scale is horizontally. So if you start down here, you can actually move horizontally and play through the scale as well. Right? And you can do a combination of both moving horizontally and vertically to run through scales. So for example, you could start here and then you hit the end, and then from here you just ascend upwards. You can do the same thing going down. If you start from this octave, and if you want to go downwards, you can go down in groups of 3. So that's the basic layout that you'll see with the in-key mode of push 2. So now let's actually talk about how to build chords. And the first chord that you want to know how to build is what is called a major triad. So before we actually start building chords, I just want to say one quick thing about what are called intervals and scale degrees. And this is basically giving every note in a scale a specific number related to the root note. So if we start at the root note, this would be C, which would also be the 1. If we go to the D, this would be also called the 2. We go to E, 3, F4, G5, A6, B7, back to the C, which is 1. And the importance of this is that as we learn the formulas to make various chords, those formulas will be made up of different intervals that we'll use to construct those chords. All right, so let's start by building a C major triad, because we're in C, and a major triad has the formula of a 1, 3, 5 to build it. So for example, if we're moving up this scale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, to build a C major triad, all you want to do is play the 1, play the 3, so skip over the 2, and play the 5, so skip over the 4, and play the 5. So there's a C major triad. I'm going to go up an octave just so it's a little clearer. So there's our C major triad. All right, so now that we know our C major triad shape, the 1, 3, 5, that's a triad. In the in-key mode, in this mode that we're in push 2, we can actually take this shape and move it up to all the different scale degrees to play what are called the diatonic triads of a given scale. And basically what this means is you're creating a triad starting on different notes of the scale, right? So the first one would be on the C. If we move over, this would be on the D, which is the second note of the scale. If we keep moving up, this is the E, F, G, A, B, back to C, right? All right, so this makes it super easy to play around with different diatonic triads in the scale, right? We can go to the 1, to the 4, to the 5, to the 2, to the 3, back to the 1. That's simple. The problem with this is that not all chords in this scale are actually major chords. Some of them are minor chords, and one of them is actually a diminished chord. So for example, this 1, 3, 5 formula that we learned for our major, well, we can move this shape here, but when we play it for the D, this is actually a D minor chord. Same with the E, this is an E minor, then we're back over to F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back to C. And although this can make playing around different chords in a given scale very easy, and you don't have to worry about hitting wrong notes, it actually places a limitation upon us that we can't actually learn and distinguish the different chords through shapes and their intervals. So this is one of the big disadvantages to playing with in-key, although it can be fun to vibe out in a scale and play around with different sounds and new scales you'd never learned before and be able to construct chords without much resistance. The problem is if you're playing a triad here, which is a C major, and you move this shape, this chord is a minor chord, but you don't learn to distinguish the difference because it's the same shape. Same here, this is a minor chord, this is a major chord, that's a diminished chord. So again, this is where we run into issues using in-key mode. It might be easy to vibe out in a scale and not hit any wrong notes, but you're not learning how to control the exact sound you want. So let's go ahead and move over to chromatic mode. So while you're in scale mode over here, you can actually hit this button to move from in-key mode, which is what we've been working with so far, and you hit it, and now it changes to chromatic mode. And basically the difference between this is, imagine that in key mode is only the notes of the scale you've selected. So you can't play any notes outside the scale you selected. So for example, right now we're working in C major. So all of these pads represent all the white keys on a keyboard. Now when we hit this button, now we see the black keys and the white keys on the keyboard at the same time. So this actually shows you all 12 notes that we have access to on pianos, guitars, basses, any instrument you can think of. And while we're in this mode, all the lit up pads still represent the scale you've chosen, and the pads that are not lit up are the notes that are outside the scale you've chosen. So the advantage of chromatic mode is that all the shapes you learn will be movable to anywhere on the push or in any key, anywhere you want. This is very similar to playing guitar, is where you learn certain shapes and then you can move those shapes to play in different keys and the shapes remain the same. So I would highly encourage you to actually learn the chords while in chromatic mode, because you'll gain a repertoire of knowledge of different chords and then you can use them in any situation you want, and that control is going to allow you to express yourself at a different level. All right, so let's revisit the square and the movement that we had when we were in key. So when we're in key mode, we can move up in groups of 3 to ascend the scale, and we can also go from left to right, and this is our C major triad. And if we move this triad, we get all these diatonic triads of the scale. Now in chromatic mode, you'll notice that there's extra notes between the lit up notes that appear. But if we still want to play through the scale, now it's going to be a little bit different. So in chromatic mode, we're still going to move up in groups of 3. The only difference is that the groups of 3 won't be right beside each other. We're actually going to follow the lit up pads that push is telling us. All right, so if we wanted to play through that our C major scale in chromatic mode, we would be playing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. See how that works? If we wanted to play it from this root note, groups of 3 once again. However, this time we're following these lit up pads. So we can still ascend the scale going horizontally as well. So if we start here, 1, 2, 3, 4. However, when we get to 4, you'll notice that 2 pads light up on the push too. And all this means is that these 2 pads represent the same exact note. So if I play the 4th here, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's the same as playing the 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And I can continue 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's multiple ways to get to the same destination. All right, so let's revisit our major triad, which we already know the formula of, which is 1, 3, 5, and let's play it while being in chromatic mode. So if we look at our scale, we would have our 1. This would be our second note of the scale. This would be our 3. So 1, 3. This would be our 4 if we kept going up. This would be our 4, and this would be our 5. So to play a C major triad in chromatic mode, you would play it 1, 3, 5 like this. And the beauty of this is that a major triad will always look like this in chromatic mode, right? Whenever you're playing these notes in this shape, it will always be a major triad. So there's our octave. If we play it here, here's our F major triad. Here's our G major triad. So now you've actually learnt a shape that you can move around, and you know that it will always be that same chord. All right, so before we dive deeper into learning a bunch of different chords, let's talk about one of the most important intervals that you want to know, and it is the octave. All right, so this is our octave for our root note, but you can do this with any single note on the push too. So this is C, D, right? That's C sharp. There's our E, our F, our G, our B, our A, C, right? It's all the same thing. If you want to play an octave from any note that you're playing, you just want to remember this shape, that is an octave. That is extremely important to memorize on the push too. Another way that you can play an octave, and that I suggest you try to remember as a visual cue, is this shape right here. So from here, this is our A, we can play the octave here. Notice how it lights up over here as well. These are all octaves. All right, so the more and more you can play around with these different octaves and be able to hit octaves everywhere, right? No matter where you are, the easier time you'll have in constructing chords and changing voicings and making them your own. All right, let's dive into learning a bunch of chords on the push to enhancing your repertoire. And if you can learn these and get them under your hands, you're going to have such an easier time composing music, having fun, expressing yourself, and really playing this thing like an instrument. All right, so the first thing we learned, we'll revisit it, is a major triad. 1, 3, 5. All right, so the first thing we'll talk about from that triad is what is called an inversion. And what an inversion is basically is the same chord, however, you're just moving up the lowest note 1 octave higher. So if this was our C major triad, 1, 3, 5, our inversion would be to move this low root note to a higher octave. Right? We're playing the same notes, it's just a different voicing, and this is called the first inversion. Right? So this would be 3, 5, 1. 1, 3, 5, 3, 5, 1. So let's move on to our second inversion, which would move our third up an octave to here. So that would be our third inversion, which would be 5, 1, 3. All right, so first inversion, 1, 3, 5. Second inversion, 3, 5, 1. Third inversion is 5, 1, 3. Notice how they all have the same quality. We're playing the same notes, but they are different voicings, different inversions. And these are super powerful once you get them under your fingers. First inversion, second inversion, third inversion, back to our first, jump to the third, second inversion, back to the first. You get the picture. All right, the next chord that we're going to cover is what is called a major seventh chord. And basically, this is playing our major triad, but adding a 7. So if we continue, this is our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're going to add the 7th on top. So there's a C major 7 chord. Very nice, very jazzy. So 1, 3, 5, 7. So you can do the same thing that we actually explored while we were playing around with our basic major triad. You can move up the root note an octave. You can then move up the third an octave. You can then go back to moving up your fifth an octave. All right, so we can actually do the exact same thing with our 7th chord, which is 1, 3, 5, 7. Very nice sounding chord, but we could move up the octave, which creates a way more dissonant voicing of that 7th chord. We can also keep going, move up this third, right? You can move up this 5th, move up the 7th again, and then we're back where we started. And you can actually play around with moving up or down various notes within a chord, up or down an octave, to play around with really cool voicing, right? So for 1, 3, 5, 7, let's go ahead and move up this third an octave, which will be up here. So that's 1, 5, 7, 3. That's a really nice voicing, right? We could also keep going and move the 7th up an octave to here and get this voicing. Right? That's also a very nice voicing. You could also move up the octave, right? A little bit more dissonance. So I encourage you to play around with moving around different octaves up and down to get different voicings, different inversions of the chord. All right, so next let's move on to the C major 9 chord, which is basically adding a 9th on top of our major 7th chord. And a 9th is basically a second. So if we move up our scale, 1, 2, it's this note, but just an octave higher, which is a 9th because it's 1 higher than our octave, which would be the 8. So there's that 9 interval that we're adding. So if we build that major 7th chord and add that 9 on top, we get this nice voicing. So there is your major 9th chord. And again, I encourage you to play around with different inversions and see what voicings you can find that you really like. So if we go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, let's move up this 3 up here. That's a nice voicing. Let's move up the 5th. That's a really nice voicing. Right, let's move up the 7th. Right, we could move the octave up here and move this 7th down. Right, these are all the same notes, but we're just playing them in a different order, which gives you a really different vibe, a really different voice. The next chord I want to talk about is what is called a major add 9 chord. And this is very similar to our major 9 chord. However, we're just not playing the 7th. All right, so we'll be playing the same thing as our 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. But we're going to take out the 7th. So that's what it sounds like. It would be 1, 3, 5, 9. I love that chord. And again, play around with different inversions, right? We could move up this 3 once again, up here. right? We can even move up the 9. Play the octave up here. Have the bass in the 5 instead, all of this fun stuff. All right, let's move on to minor chords. We actually haven't covered any minor chords yet. However, in knowing some of those major chords ahead of time, you'll see how they all interconnect. So to create a minor triad instead of a major triad, all you want to do is lower that third. And one quick thing I want to mention, I won't go too deep into this in this video, but when we're playing a C major scale, every interval has both a number and a quality. So we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1 that are octave. So all of those intervals have a number, but they also have a quality. And the quality is what distinguishes all the different modes, different scales, different chords, and the different intervals that we use to build up various chords. So in a major scale, and I'll just go over this real quick. So in a major scale, all of our intervals are either major or perfect. And a quick breakdown of this is that our seconds and our thirds are either major or minor, and our sixths and our sevenths are also either major or minor. However, our fourths and our fifths are either perfect, augmented, or diminished. You don't have to really worry about that because we're not going to go into those kinds of chords in this video, but just keep that in mind that in a major scale, everything is major or perfect. So we have our 1, our major second, this is a major second, we have our major third, we have our perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and then our octave. All right, so let's go back to our minor chords. So if we're thinking of our intervals in terms of both their number and their quality, our major triad is a 1, is a major third, and is a perfect fifth. And that's how you create our good old major triad that we know. And to create a minor triad, all you have to do is take this major third and move it down to what is called a minor third. So this interval is called a minor third, and you would stack a perfect fifth on top of that to create your minor triad. Right, so here's our major, here's our minor. Right, and just keep in mind that the major second, if you move it down, is a minor second. If you take the major third, you move it down, it's a minor third. Both the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth can move up or down. Don't worry about that too much. Our major sixth can move down to a minor sixth, and our major seventh can move down to a minor seventh. Another quick thing I want to mention is that when you take your major interval, your major third here, and you move it down to a minor third, that is also called flattening a note. You are flattening this note a half step, which is one note down, which is also called flattening the third. All right, so if you want to create a minor triad, you would have your 1, your flat 3, and then your fifth. And once again, you can play around with different octaves with these various chord tones to create different inversions, different voicings. So if we look at our minor triad, 1, flat 3, 5, well, you can move this root note up. There's your first inversion. You can move this minor 3 up here. Second inversion, you can move this fifth up here. And you're back to where you started. And just keep in mind that when you're in the C major scale, all of your major intervals and your perfect intervals are actually lit up, and all of your minor intervals are actually these dark pads, right? So our minor 3 is on a dark pad because it's not inside the C major scale. All right, let's look at our minor 7th chord, which is a beautiful chord, which is 1, flat 3, 5, and then flat 7. Right, our major 7th chord had a 1, major 3, 5, major 7. And for a minor 7th, you actually flatten both the 3rd and the 7th. You bring this one down there, and then you move this one down to get our minor 7th chord. So 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. And again, you can play around with different versions. Move up this flat 3. Let's move up this flat 7. That's a beautiful voicing. So play around with that. All right, next we're going to look at the minor 9 chord, and this is following the same logic that we followed with our major chords. We're basically going to be adding this 9 interval, right, which is the second, major 9, just because it's an octave higher. And we're going to be adding that on top of our minor 7 chord. So you have 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9. That's a nice chord. So there is your minor 9 chord. Move up this 3. Move up that 7. Move up the octave. All right, and the last minor chord I want to cover is that minor add 9. And once again, it's the exact same thing as our minor 9 chord, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, but we're just not playing this flat 7. So we get 1, flat 3, 5, 9. That is a vibey chord. Right, move this up an octave. Maybe move the 9 down and move the octave up. A lot more dissonance, move the 5 up. All these cool voicings. All right, I have a few more chords I want to cover. The next one is what is called a dominant chord. And a dominant chord is basically a major triad, so a 1, major 3, 5, but we're adding that flat 7 on top. Instead of the major 7, we're going to be playing that minor 7. And there's your dominant chord. Dominant chords can be really, really cool when you lead into different chords as a passing chord to really create some really cool movement. So you can do some really cool stuff with that dominant chord to create some tension before maybe modulating outside of the scale you're in to go back to the root note you're in. So it might look something like this. Start in your major sound. Another major chord. Find that dominant. Then go outside your scale, something like... and then go back home. And one final chord I want to touch on are what are called suspended chords, which I love so much. They really like to resolve to other chords, but they also give a nice open sound because they're not major or minor chord. So there's kind of that openness, that mystery to it. So to play a sus2 chord, instead of playing the major third in our major triad, so the 1, 3, 5, instead of playing this 3, you would play a 2. And more often with these sus chords, you'll actually see this 2 played an octave higher, so being the 9, so you would see it like this more often. And that is a beautiful sound. I love that sound. And alternatively, you can do the same thing with a 4. So instead of playing the major 3 in our major triad, instead of playing this 3, you can play the 4, which that also gives such a nice open sound. So if we bake some of those sus chords into a chord progression, it can really help accentuate the openness and enhance the resolve between your chords. So for example, if we start with like major triad over here, move to a minor 7th, right? Maybe we'll throw in that sus2. Right, let's find that minor 9th. That's a nice chord. Go to the major 7th. Right, let's go to that minor but add a 9. Then maybe let's go to the 5 and do a sus4 thing. Back to the sus2. Back home. Right, just simple things like that can really go a long way. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling just completely overwhelmed by the process in general, or if you're having trouble finishing tracks, or hey, if you just want to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that helps you go from your very first ideas to developing them, arranging them, editing them, mixing and mastering to release them, get them past the finish line so you can finish more music and continue to improve your skills. So if you're interested in checking that out, there's a link for it in the description below. And that wraps it up for this video. I hope it was useful. I hope it helps unlock some new chord progressions, some new ways to play push 2, and hopefully help you gain some more skills on this amazing instrument. I know I've learned a ton of music theory, a ton of new approaches playing with this new instrument. It is truly awesome. And let me know, do you play push 2 as an instrument? Do you use it as a big part of your production process? I'd love to know in the comments down below. And hey, I'd also love to know, what would you like to see me cover next? I'm super open to create more push 2 videos, some music theory videos, some production stuff. So if there's something you're curious about related to music or music production, or if you're having trouble with something specifically, or if, hey, you just have an idea of what you'd like to see on this channel, let me know in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to start a conversation and collaborate on some future content for this channel. And that'll wrap it up for this video. So we'll see you in the next one.